Part 24. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Xiao. Chapter 240. The grandfather and grandson went down the mountain and found a small restaurant. They didn't order much, just 4 cold dishes and 7 hot dishes. The taste is naturally not as authentic and exquisite as Zhendong, but it is more affordable. Not counting the 4 cold dishes, the 7 hot dishes are almost enough for 10 people. It can be seen that after the master heard those words, the whole person's mood went up to a higher level. In a good mood, the appetite naturally increased, and a large pot of boiled goods and meat slices and lotus soup were all filled by the master. The whole table of food was swept away by the master and the apprentice in less than 20 minutes. The two of them added a large bowl of braised noodles with unsatisfied taste, and then walked back with satisfaction. When he walked to a stall on the road, the master suddenly stopped. Su Tong saw several masks hanging on the stall. At first glance, these masks looked festive, but upon closer inspection, they were simply fooling people. It's a little faded. But the master casually picked up a mask and handed it to him. Take it, it will be useful when you go back tonight. Pig head. Su Tong wanted to change it to another one, but the master stopped him, pointed to the mask and said, "This mask is very poorly made, and the only thing that makes it valuable is the pig's head." Su Tong was confused when he heard this. At this time, the master picked up a sheep head mask and started playing with it. It seemed that he liked the sheep head mask quite a lot. He didn't know what the master was going to do, but he still paid the bill. Leave. When the two returned to Shangqing Palace, the master did not mention the matter of worshipping Shangkao. He made a pot of tea, lay down in the shade, let Su Tong fan him, and took a short rest with his eyes slightly closed. This made Su Tong feel as upset as a cat scratching his head, and he was just thinking about paying homage to Shangkao. It wasn't until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the weather wasn't that hot anymore, that master slowly opened his eyelids, glanced at Su Tong and said with a smile, "Are you in a hurry?" He, a little bit. Su Tong brought the tea and said he was lying if he said he was not in a hurry. The master nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer, and continued, "Actually, there is nothing to teach you. The master leads you to practice alone. Haven't you already mastered it?" Su Tong's heart skipped a beat. He had never told his master about his ability to worship Shangkao. He thought he had fooled him last time, but now that his master had revealed it, he felt a little guilty. He glanced at the master from the corner of his eye, and saw that the master was looking at him with squinted eyes, with clear black and white eyes, as if he had already penetrated everything. However, this matter obviously cannot be avoided. Just when he was about to give an explanation to the master, he saw the master wave his hand. "No need to explain, what you said is 70% true and 30% false. If you make it up again, it will not be round." Su Tong nodded frankly and looked at the master's eyes. "There are some things that I can't give you a satisfactory explanation for, but you also said that 70% of my words are true, at least these 70% are true. It's real gold. A lie is a lie after all. The master ran out yesterday and raided 3 strangers' dens. I'm afraid it wasn't as the master said. His hands were itchy, so he probably went to touch his base, otherwise he wouldn't be here today. Say something like this. Ha 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 ha." After a moment, the master actually smiled, picked up the tea bowl and took a sip. "Come on, I won't ask you any more. Anyway, you are the person with our first name after all, and it is passed on to everyone. Looking at the contemporary era, it is good to pass it on." After that, the master took out a notebook from his sleeve and handed it to him. Su Tong took it and took a look. He saw 3 words written crookedly on it in thin gold: Huan Quan Lu. The Shangkao is a technique, and this is a tool. Once you understand it, you will be able to find the way to the Dharma, and then you will be considered successful. The master took a sip of tea and said, I still remember when we first met. What did you say? Su Tong's head was buzzing as he looked at the contents in the book that were like ghost drawings. Hearing the master's question, Su Tong nodded. You said, just go and learn if you don't know it. Learn it word by word. This way you will learn it. What's yours is yours. The master nodded with satisfaction, crossed his legs, picked up the tea bowl and took a sip of tea. He glanced out of the corner of his eye and said, then why are you still standing there? The corner of Su Tong's mouth twitched, and he asked me to teach myself with his emotions. But when the master spoke, Su Tong could only squat aside and study the book obediently. Just as he was about to leave, he heard the master shout, wait a minute. Yeah, Su Tong thought the master was going to change his mind, but when he turned around, he saw the master casually throw the pig head mask he just bought to him. Take it with you. Don't take it off. Not understanding what the master was doing, Su Tong took the mask in his hand and found a small yellow talisman inside the mask. Seeing this, he did not doubt that it was there, so he raised his hand and put the mask on his head. As soon as he clicked the button, he sat aside and began to study the Huan Quan Lu. Although the thin gold body looks difficult, if you look carefully, you can still distinguish the content inside. However, it is more like a weird novel than a martial arts secret book. It didn't contain any mysterious moves as I thought. Instead, it told a story from the perspective of a Taoist priest about what he saw and heard in the netherworld. He was confused at first, but as he read, he became fascinated by the stories in the book. For example, a Taoist priest turned into an antique dealer and told a story about a wealthy family to a scholar in a tea house. The scholar was fascinated and said that the life of this wealthy family was happier than that of gods. It's just that this wealthy family is defeated by gold on the outside and inside. All the signs of internal and external difficulties in the family are already signs of collapse. In the end, the family is ruined. After the story was told, the scholar couldn't help but sigh, but when he thought about it, he just felt that the story told in the book was so familiar. Before the scholar could think about it carefully, he realized that the Taoist priest had disappeared long ago, and even the tea house was gone. No shadow. When he looked again, he found that he was actually sitting on a withered grave. He was so shocked that he thought he had hit a ghost and hurried home. But when I ran home and took a look, I realized that I had been dead for several days. Wasn't the story the Taoist priest told his own story? There is also a passage at the end of the story, when the false is true, the true is also false, and the inaction is everywhere and then nothing. There are several short stories at the end, all of which bring people into the story from the perspective of the Taoist priest. Although the stories are short, each one has a profound meaning, which makes Su Tong read with gusto. It was just that he was in a trance, but he didn't notice that the master walked up to the water tank at some point, stretched out his hand and pulled out the meatball inside that was about to be crushed into a meat patty. The meatball didn't know what kind of monster it was. No matter how much Su Tong tortured it, it never gave up. But after it fell into the master's hands, it trembled and didn't dare to move, allowing the master to knead and play with it at will. Fortunately, the master didn't mean to hurt it. He only said, "You can't beat him now that you are like this. I will let you go when it gets dark." When the meatball heard that he could walk, he was so excited that he started shaking all over. But when he turned to look at Su Tong, a cold light appeared in his eyes, as if he was debating whether to leave or continue to look for opportunities to retaliate. "Forget it, don't leave if you don't want to leave. It just so happens that I've been bored recently. How about you stay and accompany me?" the master continued. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you anymore as long as I'm here." Meatball was overjoyed and nodded repeatedly. At this time, the master suddenly put a sheep head mask on Meatball's head. "I'll give you a gift. You are a sheep and he is a pig." Rukai was dumbfounded, took one look at Su Tong and immediately became happy. Yes, 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 he is a pig, he is a pig. Rakaio looked back and saw the pig head mask Su Tong was wearing, and nodded with pride. Even after getting the master's approval, he rolled on the ground and turned into a lamb. He stared at the sheep head mask and ran to Su Tong to show off crazily. I am a sheep and you are a pig, ha 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 ha, pig head. Su Tong frowned and raised his head, his eyes glowing coldly, which made Meatball tremble with fear, and he quickly took a few steps back. At this time, the master behind him grabbed it with one hand and put it in his arms, as if to support it. There is only one pig in this family, which one of you is the pig? He's a pig. Seeing the support of the big boss, Rakaio suddenly became more courageous and pointed at Su Tong. It's him, it's him, it's him. Oh, are you sure he is a pig? The master asked again with narrowed eyes, but this time his voice became hoarse. Yes, he is a pig. He is a pig. Meatball obviously didn't notice the danger and said in a very sure tone. Then when you two come together, who is the master? He's a pig. As soon as Rakaio finished speaking, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head, as if something was burning under the mask. There was a buzzing in my head, and my thoughts suddenly blurred. In my groggy ears, I continued to hear the master's voice. Who is the master? Meatball's head was buzzing, and he had no time to distinguish, so he just subconsciously shouted to Su Tong, he is the Lord. As soon as these words came out, the mask on Meatball's head suddenly cracked, and a talisman was burned deeply into its head like a red-hot iron. At the same time, Su Tong's forehead felt cool. After taking off the mask, he took out a small mirror and took a look. Sure enough, there was a shallow mark on his forehead. The mark flashed on his forehead for a few times and then gradually buried under his skin and could no longer be seen. Clear. At the same time, when he looked at the meatball again, he suddenly felt a special feeling in his heart. Hint. You obtain a special biological pet. After completing the ritual, the pet can be put into the prop book for foster care. During the foster care period, 2 script points will be consumed every day. Hint. You subdue the blood resentment body, and the curse of Polypoma disappears. Hint. You subdue the blood resentment body. Please check the specific entries after completing the ceremony. When the prompt came, Su Tong looked at his master again. He saw his master sitting on a chair and throwing the meatball in front of him with a smile. There was green smoke all over the meatball, and the marks on his forehead were flashing. Fell to the ground without moving. For the first 7 days, give him some yellow bars, and then sprinkle ashes on him. After 7 days, it's done. The master pointed at the little thing and said. Is it that simple? He couldn't help but be surprised when he looked at the motionless meatball on the ground. When he went out to eat, his master said that he would collect the meatball for him. He thought it would be very troublesome, but didn't expect it to be that simple. Immediately, his eyes rolled around and he came forward and asked, is this also the magic of our 7 sects? Why haven't you heard of it? The master grinned and said, no, this is the Xiangtang talisman of Northeastern Disciple Ma. You haven't heard of it? It's normal. Since ancient times, Miao magic has not come out of Sichuan, and the 5 immortals can't reach Shanhaiguan. Oh, Su Tong suddenly realized, it turns out you stole someone else's lesson. The master pursed his lips and kicked Su Tong on the butt. Is that called stealing? Things between practitioners are called learning from others. The jade from another mountain can attack the stone. The grandfather and grandson were chatting animatedly when they heard hurried footsteps outside the door. Su Tong quickly put on his jack mask and saw Gao Zhou rushing in with a panic on his face. When he saw Su Tong and Mr. Shui, Gao Zhou Xian shouted to Su Tong, oh no, there's trouble. It's said that Kinju has started preparing for the Bamang conference in advance. As soon as he finished speaking, Gao Zhou suddenly realized something and stared straight at Shuigui beside him. His eyes suddenly widened and he knelt on the ground with a plop. You can't reach the passengers by jumping up and down the stairs. Say hello to Master Taishan. Su Tong stood aside and curled his lips when he saw this. When he saw this, he couldn't help but complained in his heart, "Bah, you are a licking dog." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 241. Although they are all Yinmen, they are in the business of dead people. But this is just another way of saying it. If we really want to admit it, our relationship with each other is not close at all. When Su Tong met people from the 8 gates outside, he could still call him senior brother to establish a relationship, but when he met people from the 4 small Yin gates, he had nothing to build a relationship with. As Gaozhou, it is enough to bow with both hands, but the person in front of you is Mr. Shuigui, so the situation is different. Jumping on a tip is a saying in Western Hunan. The so-called zombies jump on their tips. Zombies are also carried out because there are places where zombies can't get up, so zombies need to be carried on their backs. Another theory is that when they pass a village, they will shout, "Yin people go on the road, strangers avoided." Basically they don't spend the night in the village, they mostly rest in places like Yizhuang and then leave. When I was a child, my children asked out of curiosity, but the adults in the family couldn't tell them directly, so the term jumpbacker came into being. As for climbing up the ladder and not being able to reach it, it is a slang term on the road, referring to the surname Gao. The combined meaning is to exorcise the corpses of the Gao family. After understanding this sentence, it is not difficult to understand why Gao Zhou wanted to salute. In reality, the master and the old man of the Gao family were sworn friends. Gao Zhou's father was also deeply inspired by the master, and Gao Zhou worshipped him both emotionally and rationally. Gao family. The master was a little surprised. He glanced at Su Tong, coughed twice and asked, "Who are you, Gao Zai?" "It's my uncle." Not long ago, he learned that Senior was going to interfere in Bamang's affairs. My uncle was so anxious that he spent money to send a special message to me, telling me to take good care of Senior. However, Senior's whereabouts are erratic. I also heard what Brother Zhao Jian said, and then I knew that Senior was here. Last time I had a quick visit, I was unlucky and didn't meet Senior. I didn't expect to catch up with him this time. Fortunately, Gao Zhou was from the Gao family and knew everything about his family. Naturally, his lie was more reasonable than Su Tong's. In fact, Gao Zai was his own father, and he had indeed summoned people at the beginning, because Mr. Gao did not approve of Mr. Shui doing this at all. In the words of Mr. Gao, "If the sky falls, you are as tall as you are, so why should you let little people like them take this risk?" Mr. Shui didn't explain much about this. He only said goodbye to the number of days. Mr. Gao was so anxious that he had no choice but to send a letter to a distant relative from the side branch to help take care of him. But unfortunately, his distant relative was not in Province H, and even if he got the news, it would be beyond his reach. Before Gao Zhou entered the world of scripts, he worked hard to find out everything about these things from his father Gao Tianfang. Therefore, no matter what the master asked, Gao Zhou could answer the questions fluently and perfectly. "That's it?" The master's expression softened slightly, and he patted Gao Zhou on the shoulder with a smile. "I just told this brat that since ancient times, Miao shamans have never left Sichuan, and the 5 immortals can only pass through the 3 customs. You slapped me in the face so quickly. Old Taishan has broken my heart. Our family is a branch of the family, and we have not violated the ancestral precepts." When Gao Zhou said this, the master's smile gradually widened. He groped in his sleeves and threw a box to Gao Zhou. "Yesterday I met a few unlucky guys. They are not strong enough, but there are a lot of good things. There is one thing that is very suitable for your Gao family's magic. I will give it to you." After finishing speaking, he did not forget to add, "Oh, by the way, Later on you can pick any two of the corpses under the vegetable garden and take them back, but don't pick that old beggar, he's too old and has no potential. Gao Zhou took the box and took a look. Inside the box was half a bloody wooden sign. The sign was cracked and looked ordinary, but the blood stained on it exuded an evil aura and was as bright as ever in the sunlight. It's like it was just sprinkled on. Gao Zhou was an expert at refining corpses. When he took a look at this thing, he knew that it was a rare treasure. At least for him, it was worth 1,000 pieces of money, even for script points. Hearing the master's words again, the boy was even more happy. He quickly knelt down and kowtowed to the master 3 times before getting up. "What did you just say?" Su Tong saw that this guy was so happy that he could hardly find the southeast, northwest, and northwest, so he could only take the initiative to ask. After hearing what he said, Gao Zhou suddenly remembered, slapped his forehead and said, yes, this matter is more important. This old thief Kinju plans to hold the Bamang conference in advance, and the time is set in Zhonyuan festival. After speaking, he did not forget to look at Su Tong. "By the way, the mother and son told me this news, and..." Gao Zhou thought for a moment to organize his words before continuing. "The statue that was lost in the police station, the Buddha statue, was secretly hidden in Bamang Mountain by Jian Shu and others, saying that they wanted to ask Bodhisattva for help in suppressing the evil spirits in the yin and yang Dao." After Gao Zhou finished speaking, Su Tong looked at his master, wanting to see his attitude. However, his master didn't seem surprised at all and just nodded calmly. Su Tong's ability to observe people's emotions has long been superb. Seeing his master's calm expression, he knew that this matter might not be as simple as Gao Zhou said. After all, the master's purpose is to prevent Kinju and others from opening the yin and yang Dao. If this matter is true, the master's reaction is too bland. So he walked to the master and asked curiously, "Master, do you think this matter is fraudulent?" The master smiled, that smile with a hint of contempt in his confidence, as if a top student was facing a question from a bad student who only found it funny. "That's not a lice on a bald man's head. It's obvious at a glance. Zhonyuan is originally the ghost festival. It's the day when the door to the underworld opens and the wandering ghosts go home. On this day, hundreds of ghosts walk at night, the gods give in, and the Bodhisattva is full. Are you going to look for bad luck on this day?" "Old man, what do you mean?" Gao Zhou asked with his eyes widened. "I just heard Master Shuigui sitting on the chair, picking up the tea bowl and taking a sip calmly. I am too old to run away. If any of them wants to come up, just come up and kill each one. The ground in the backyard is also big, you are in charge of killing and burying." He spoke the most cruel words in the most relaxed tone. Even Gao Zhou, who was standing aside, could feel the suffocating sense of oppression in these words. It was by no means as simple as words. This old man is the only one who can treat strangers in the world as nothing, to put it in such an understatement. The old man is not in a hurry. He looks like he has no intention of leaving Baman Mountain even if the sky falls. He is as stable as Mount Tai. But Su Tong and Gao Zhou were not so lucky. After the old man finished speaking, they received a reminder of the main mission. Main Mission 2, The Tribulation of Zhonyuan. Mission Tips, the undercurrent has begun, no one can stay out of it, the Ghost Festival is about to turn into the Ghost Tribulation. Mission Goal, smash the conspiracy of Kinju and others. The task prompt ended, and before the two of them had time to discuss it, another prompt sounded in Su Tong's ears, but this time the prompt was completely different from the other prompts. The harsh sound was more like sounding an alarm for him. Warning. Because your message to open the legendary item was intercepted by a certified player, the other party will come in half an hour. Warning. Other players will enter the world of this scenario. Please be careful. When the privilege activation conditions are met, the descendant will be marked with a special mark, please pay attention. Coming. Su and Gao looked at each other, their expressions were not very good, but this incident was expected by both of them. After all, this was a big script, and it was impossible for the two of them to live happily and gain experience here. What's more, the two of them hugged Mr. Shue's lap and were completely on the opposite side of the world. Players who joined at this time would most likely become their enemies. It can be understood that this is some kind of balancing method in the script space. In other words, the advantage is still on their side. Calculating the time, there are only a few days left in the Ghost Festival. Those players will arrive in half an hour, and there is not much space to operate in terms of time. After the two discussed for a while, Gao Zhou left the Shangqing Palace in a hurry. He usually kept a low profile and could continue to hide, but Su Tong was different. Last time at the station, he detonated Big Fatty, which caused a group of aliens to lose their arms and legs. Several of them died on the spot. Now he is the center of attention wherever he goes. As long as those players are not newbies, they will definitely use this information to determine their identity as a player. So Su Tong simply chose to retreat. No matter what certified player you are, I will hide at home and not go out. If you have the ability, come in. In this way, on the one hand, he can complete the master recognition ceremony of the resentful spirit with peace of mind, and on the other hand, he can further increase the power of Beishenko by studying the Huanquan Lu. I have to say that I still have the support of the old man, otherwise I might not be able to be so leisurely. I am worthy of being Lao Taishan. Shortly after Gao Zhou left, a cold wind began to blow in L City, the clouds continued to roll in, and soon a heavy rain began. Su Tong stood in front of the Shangqing Palace and could vaguely see several beams of light breaking out of the clouds and spreading around L City. The beam of light faded and appeared on the rainy day, and eventually became imperceptible, but it did not disappear completely. He thought to himself that this should be the effect of his privilege. Chang Miao came back very early in the evening. She said it was raining so hard that the cesspools in several public toilets were filled with rainwater, making it impossible for anyone to get in. Simply rest at home for a few days, wait until the fecal water recedes and the toilet is cleaned. It seems that after witnessing Mr. Shui casually killing those beggars last time, Chang Miao's mentality has changed. At least he is no longer as worried about his shit empire plan as before. One night, as usual, Su Tong inserted 3 yellow incense sticks on the incense burner where the resentful spirits were buried, fed them 3 times a day, and then covered them with incense ashes. This method is the method of raising immortals in northeastern Dima. The so-called fairy hall refers to setting up a hall, asking a great fairy to sit at the hall, summoning some little ghosts and spirits to be the hall masters, and the younger brother Ma himself goes out to do business. To put it bluntly, Dima works for these great immortals. Those so-called aristocratic families are the super halls supported by generations of working-class families. Su Tong didn't know if there really were so-called great immortals, but I'm afraid some monsters and spirits were indispensable. This couldn't help but remind him of the Huqi he met in the robbery cave under the Shengxian Bureau. Speaking of which, this man was also a figure. It's a pity that I don't have any fate with him. When I left the script world, all the items related to Huqi disappeared. Otherwise, if one day, I could rely on Huqi's relationship to visit the 3 northeastern provinces. It should be quite interesting to play. It's so boring. I wonder where you are now, idiot. He stood in front of the main hall, looking at the drizzle falling from the sky, and suddenly thought of the fool for no reason. When he thought of this silly guy getting into the Bamang ravine alone, in such a cold weather, he didn't know if he would. Will it be cold, will he be hungry, what will he eat? Thinking of this, Su Tong could not help but feel worried. When he was lost in thought, he suddenly heard a faint sound, which made him turn around and find that the source of the sound was actually Chang Miao's room. It's so late, what is this guy doing without sleeping? With curiosity, Su Tong walked to the window and took a look inside through the crack of the window. He was immediately happy. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shuigan Xiao. Chapter 242. Couldn't you be happier? Looking through the window, Chang Miao was sitting cross-legged on the bed, meditating, waving her hands around as if she was possessed. Just when Su Tong was worried, he saw this guy's face was distorted, and he was making bursts of sounds from his mouth. A low moan. Take a closer look, ha 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 ha, this guy is cramping. Seeing Chang Miao's funny performance, Su Tong almost laughed like a pig outside the window. Just as he was looking at it, he was suddenly patted on the head. Su Tong knew without thinking that it must be the master. After all, no one here except his old man could put his hand on his head without knowing it. Turning around, I saw the master making a silent gesture, and looking out of the window out of the corner of his eye. For a moment, the master covered his mouth and turned his head. The grandfather and grandson looked at each other, and finally laughed out loud under the night sky. Ha 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 ha. Hearing the laughter outside the window, Chang Miao was stunned for a moment, and soon she felt like a little secret had been revealed. Regardless of the fact, a group of 21 people got into the bed, and the quilt covered their heads. He looked like he didn't want to come out again, which made Master and Su Tong burst into laughter again. However, after laughing, the master was still very honest. He took out a shiny yellow notebook from his sleeve, threw it into the window, and shouted towards the window, as the saying goes, one drink and one peck, that old guy himself, if you are greedy, you should be compensated. This is a dirty trick of the beggar clan. If you can study it yourself and understand it, you will naturally have a chance. Su Tong stood aside. When he heard this, his eyes suddenly lit up. When he looked at the master again, he couldn't help but thought to himself in surprise, it turns out to be you. When Mr. Song first talked about it, he mentioned that Chang Miao finally understood the way of purification and created the method of hundreds of excrements. From then on, he gathered the poison of hundreds of excrements into his body, beating countless people in all religions and 9 schools, and called him daddy. Unexpectedly, the person who first gave Chang Miao this advice was actually the master. Master was really careless and didn't tell me such important news. Although Chang Miao was hiding under the quilt, he was still moved after hearing what the master said. After realizing that the two of them had gone far, Chang Miao quietly poked his head out of the quilt, picked up the book and started reading. Stand up. It doesn't matter if you don't read it. Once he saw it, Chang Miaoren was fascinated. He was even surprised to find that the content in this book was very similar to the content of the fragment of Tai's Hang induction given to him by Taoist Zizhu. Not only do the two fit very well, they even have a sense of echoing each other. In the past, Chang Miao always felt that there were things missing in the Tai's Hang induction sutra, but now when comparing it with this book, she felt like she was filling in the gaps. Unknowingly, Chang Miao just passed in the content of this book. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. The Ghost Festival is getting closer and closer. Su Tong's life has become more and more nourishing these days. He gets up every day and puts 3 sticks of yellow incense on the incense burner. Then he and his master go down the mountain early to have a hearty breakfast at the bottom of the mountain. Then one day I squatted in the corner, holding the book The Record of Wang Quan, and began to ponder the stories in it. Speaking of this book, The Record of Wang Quan, the stories are rich and colorful, but I didn't realize anything from it after looking at it. Every time I asked the master would just smile mysteriously and not answer me at all. However, apart from the fact that the master was unwilling to give any more guidance on matters related to spiritual practice, the master basically answered every question on other matters. There are many anecdotes among them, and it is particularly interesting to tell them one by one from the master's mouth. At night, the grandfather and grandson were sitting on the stone steps in the courtyard, making a pot of good tea and putting some cakes on the table. They looked at the stars in the sky. It was a scene that was difficult to see in reality, with dense starlight, and you could see it without using any tools, just by looking up. "Master, you really made a paper figurine for Sixi." Su Tong took a bite of the apple in his hand and asked about it curiously. The master nodded and did not deny. "After I was called, I hurried over with the tools and worked for 20 days. The money I earned was barely enough for travel expenses, but I will give you a merit card. That thing was of some use before. Later, I burned it as firewood." "Called," he raised his head, "is it the government?" "Yes. Strictly speaking, it's Qin Tianjian," master said. "Because the Qing court had a special institution called Qintianjian. This institution was established in the Ming dynasty and was inherited by the Qing dynasty. In fact, there have been such institutions in all dynasties, such as the Taishi in the Qin dynasty, the Taishi Cao in the Sui dynasty, the Taishi Bureau, the Hunshan Supervisory Yuan, and the Hunyi Supervisor. Even the Yuan dynasty, which was not culturally connected, all had places like the Taishi Bureau. On the surface, he is in charge of astronomy, calculating solar terms, and formulating calendars, but on the other hand, he is in charge of different people in the world. In its heyday, all strangers from all 3 religions and 9 schools in the world were under its control. There was a roster, and every generation of your descendants had to report it through the local county government. If it is not on the roster, then you are a gangster. To put it nicely, you are called a green man, and to put it worse, you are a group of thieves. You are black and white. No one will pursue you, and there will even be a reward for whoever kills you." In the late Qing dynasty, Qin Tianjian still retained this power. He had a roster in hand and could call on strangers from all over the world at any time. The master was also called upon at that time and took over the job. "What if you don't answer?" Su Tong asked with wide eyes. "No answer." The master frowned and said, "There is no choice. If you don't accept it, it is a bad rule." It was an era when the people did not fight with the officials, and foreigners were just ordinary people. Speaking of this, the master's eyes became a lot sad, as if he thought of something that made him unhappy. For a moment, the master turned his eyes to Su Tong, with a look of envy in his eyes. "My child, you are different from us old guys. At least you have the courage to say no. We are not as bold as you. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers." Su Tong smiled. Unexpectedly, he was just being polite, but he saw the master's face straighten. "No." The master patted his arm and raised his head to look at the stars in the sky. "It's different. If you take out the Qin Tianjian sign now, old guys like Jianshu will still have to kneel down and kowtow to you. It's not like they don't resist. They don't have the courage to do so, but they are not allowed to do so here." The master said and pointed to his head. "Feudal thinking has long been engraved in their bones like a brand on their souls. They dare not and cannot say no." Su Tong seemed to understand a little, but he seemed to have missed it. He realized in his heart that there seemed to be some hidden message in the master's words, but he was not able to understand it for a while. "You are different from that kid Xiao Gao. You don't have this layer of restraint, so you can enter a new era, a brand new era, an era where everyone has faith, but is no longer fooled by ghosts and gods. In that era, the art is the art, the Tao is the Tao, the universe is clear, and justice is in the human heart." After the master finished speaking, he put his hands behind his back. The moonlight shrouded the master's face, making his face blurred like a layer of silver frost. As for those ghosts and monsters who want to crawl into the new era, the wrinkles on the master's face were like a blooming golden chrysanthemum. "Just stay in this era with me." Su Tong was sitting on the stone steps. Hearing this, his body suddenly trembled slightly. When he looked at his master again, he felt that his master under the moonlight was like an unattainable mountain, suppressing all the monsters and monsters below. My mood was even more turbulent, and I couldn't calm down for a long time. Kaka. At this moment, there was a sudden strange noise from the incense burner behind him. When he looked back, he saw a round ball of meat crawling out of it. Huh? You woke up so soon? Seeing the meatball, he seemed to feel something in his heart, and waved towards him, "Come here." Meatball wanted to run over, but after hearing these words, it rolled involuntarily into Sutong's hand, and Sutong held it in his palm and looked at it carefully. After being buried in the incense ashes for so many days, the originally bloody flesh ball now had a light golden skin, which looked soft and waxy when held in the hand, which was quite interesting. He threw it forward casually and shouted. Suddenly, the meatball rolled on the ground and turned into a small yellow man. Although it has no facial features, it moves like a fool, taking a few steps forward and rolling around. Your paper figurine was broken last time. Having this little thing to help you can also add some fighting power to you. As the master spoke, he grabbed it with his big hand and pinched the meatball in his hand. The meatball immediately turned into a light yellow dagger in the master's hand. Swinging towards the big bluestone in front, Sutong didn't even see the dagger touching the bluestone, but saw that the bluestone had been cut in half easily. With another pinch, the meatball transformed into a long stick again, dancing until a strong wave of wind rose in the air. The master waited for a few times before throwing it to Sutong. "Not bad, it suits you very well. Is this sturdy?" Seeing the meatball turned into a stick, Sutong was still a little doubtful, but the master's words quickly dispelled Sutong's concerns. "As long as you don't encounter those magic weapons that have been worshipped for a long time, it will basically be fine." After getting the master's affirmation, I felt a lot more relieved. I threw this guy into the prop book and took a look. When the entry appeared in front of me, Sutong's face finally showed a look of joy and surprise. He really didn't expect that this meat dumpling who had been tortured to death would have such a strong entry. Pet Wraith, LV3. Special dark creatures are forcibly tamed by special methods. They are not very loyal and have a certain probability of escaping or backlash. Passive skill 1, Body of Resentful Spirit. Immune to physical damage by 40%. Passive skill 2, Body of Change. It can change according to the master's command. It can be large or small, fine or thick, but the size and intensity of the change need to be based on the level. Active skill 1, Devour. Level up by swallowing dark matter or similar souls. Each time you level up by 3 levels, you will have a chance to gain an active skill. Active skill 2, Blood Escape. At the cost of burning level, you can quickly float away from the scene after activation. Note, each time the creature is crushed, it will drop 1 level. If the level drops to 0, it will disappear completely. I have seen many various prop cards at the exhibition, but this is the first time I have seen the pet card. I have to thank the master for his method. He only used 2 masks to subdue this guy. After all, ginger is still spicier. In fact, if it weren't for the buff increase of the underworld aura on him last time, it would be a fool's dream to easily defeat Meatball. After all, the backlash of the item card Polyposis Tumor is no joke. The appearance of the resentful spirit made up for the lack of weapons at his disposal, and at the same time made him more determined. If he wants to change the script, at least he must not let the master bear everything by himself. After thinking about it, Sutong said goodbye to his master for the time being and chose to leave Shangqing Palace. Regarding his decision, the master just nodded. Even though he knew that Sutong walking outside would be a thorn in the flesh of everyone in the world, but the sharp edge of the sword was sharpened. The master also wants to see how much waves this kid can stir up outside. So early the next morning, after Sutong and the old man had breakfast together, Sutong bowed deeply to the old man's back, regardless of the strange looks from the people on the street, turned around and disappeared into the crowd. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 243. As the Ghost Festival is approaching, many small stalls on the streets have started selling ghost goods. There are 3 ghost festivals in China, namely Qingming, Zhonyuan and Hanyi, which are the so-called tomb cleaning, Zhonyuan lighting, and Hanyi burning. River lanterns at the Zhonyuan festival are the most traditional way of worshipping. Therefore, most of the ghost goods on sale are small lamps, which are neither cheap nor expensive. Whether it is for fun or to pay homage to their ancestors, many people buy them. In fact, in addition to these 3 festivals, there is another one called Shangxi Festival. It is the earliest ghost festival of the Han people, but later it was close to the Tomb Sweeping Festival, and there was a custom of going out for outings, so people gradually combined the 2 festivals into one. It is said that this custom is still retained in Japan and some other places. Boss, is this paper lantern really useful? You are a good child, safe and environmentally friendly. I will put it in the basin for you now. You can see that it is not heavy at all. Really, it's so beautiful. Boss, I'll give you 2. On the streets of the old city, I saw a group of students returning home from school gathered in front of a small stall. The various river lanterns displayed in the stall were completely different from the river lanterns on other stalls. The river lanterns sold by the store are exquisite enough to look real. Whether they are lotus leaves or peony buds, they all give people a sense of variety and variety. The price is also surprisingly cheap, you can buy 2 for just a dime. Not to mention children after school, many adults after get off work also bought them, so that no one paid attention to other nearby stalls selling river lanterns. In one afternoon, at least hundreds of river lanterns were sold out. Looking at the box full of money, Su Tong stood up unsteadily, walked to a sesame seed stand and bought a sesame seed cake, sat on a stone and ate it. He glanced sideways at the 2-story building and saw a faint green halo flickering in the building. There is not just one descendant, judging from the beam of light seen last time, there are at least 5 people. As for the space prompt, only one is a certified player. This is a tricky thing for him, so he can only use the elimination method to determine it. In the past few days in Shangqing Palace, I have also observed that other weak light beams are constantly changing positions in the city, except for this green light. This made him wonder if the owner of this green beam was the certified player he was looking for. According to his previous guesses, the arrival of certified players will inevitably have to pay a certain price, and there may even be a period of weakness. If you are a certified player, it may be a good idea to remain unchanged at this time to cope with the changes. Choice. Thinking of this, Su Tong opened his mouth and gnawed all the sesame seed cakes on his hand. He looked around and saw that there were not many pedestrians around. He walked slowly to the door and saw a piece of paper being tossed by him gently. The paper man slipped in through the crack of the door while floating, and then he heard the sound of the door pin twitching from behind the door. Su Tong gently pushed the door open, rushed in and quickly closed the door. A sideways glance revealed that there were no lights on in the house. In the dim light, the air was filled with the smell of rotting wood. Go through the living room and go upstairs step by step. Ta da. Da. Da da. Before walking up the stairs, a brisk knocking sound came to Su Tong's ears. The sound came from the flashing green room. It was like the sound of some kind of mechanism. Su Tong walked in front of the door. After waiting for a moment through the door, he moved his fingers slightly and saw a paper figure quietly slipping through the crack in the door. Huh! He was a little surprised for a moment. He pushed the door open and saw a wooden puppet sitting on a chair in the room. The puppet was not a rough work. Every part from head to toe seemed to have been carefully carved. In detail, the clock-like gyroscope in the chest beats rapidly, making a ta, da, da sound. What is this? Su Tong looked at the puppet with curiosity in his eyes. The puppet did not look like a living thing, but the blue halo on his body was indeed correct. Just when he wondered if this thing could be some kind of special prop, the puppet's eyelids suddenly opened, and his eyes slowly looked at Su Tong, who was standing outside the door. The mechanisms on his body started to rotate faster, and a deep, weird laugh came from his mouth. He, are you surprised? You. Before the puppet finished speaking, his voice suddenly stopped. With a click sound, Su Tong stretched out his hand and actually pulled out the puppet's head, looking curiously at the beating gears inside the puppet. In Su Tong's other hand, he was holding a screwdriver transformed from a resentful spirit, and he was patiently dismantling the puppet. Although the workmanship of the puppet is very complicated, with a good assistant like Wraith, he can change the shape and size of the tool at will. Whether it is a big hole or a small gap, he can easily insert it into it. In less than 2 minutes, Su Tong opened the puppet's heart and saw that the center of the beating gear was actually a living finger. The reason why he saw the green mark was on this finger. Really interesting. He picked up his finger and threw it into the prop book. What was surprising was that the prop booklet actually gave this severed finger 2 lines of entries. Mysterious severed finger. The price paid for a special item can be used to block all information about oneself. The price of shielding the privilege is not just a severed finger, but giving it to the script studio can be exchanged for a high bonus. It seems that I still underestimated the methods of these players. I thought that I could take advantage of my privileges, but I didn't expect that you have a good plan and I have a ladder to cross the bridge. There are actually people who can block the privileges from space. As for the high bounty, you can tell with your toes that this is just a beautiful word from the space to cover up its incompetence. It is not so much a bonus as compensation. Just as he was thinking about it, Su Tong's mind suddenly moved. He turned around and saw a woman standing at the door holding a stick. The woman was about 50 years old and was still wearing a pair of loose pajamas. It seemed that she did not expect to be discovered by Su Tong, and she looked embarrassed for a moment. Who are you? Leave quickly or I will call the police, the woman said nervously, holding up the stick. Seeing this, Su Tong asked, who is the owner of this room? Where is the person? The woman was about to speak when she suddenly heard footsteps coming from downstairs and screamed urgently, Old Fang, come quickly, the thief is here. As the woman spoke, she raised the stick in her hand to greet Su Tong. But her clumsy steps were as ridiculous as a 3-year-old child in Su Tong's eyes. With the blessing of close combat technique, the moment she saw the stick coming down, she turned around to avoid the wooden stick, and at the same time her toes were just as soon as he stepped forward, the woman was immediately thrown to pieces. Ding dang dang. At this time, there was a rush of footsteps downstairs, and a middle-aged man rushed up and entered the door to see the woman who had fallen to the ground. His expression changed and he was about to grab the bench next to the table and fight for his life. But at this time, Su Tong suddenly took out something, causing the man's body to freeze in place as if a restraining spell had been cast. When the cold pistol was pressed against the woman's head, the black gun body exuded a muted luster. The cold touch made the woman's body freeze immediately, and she did not dare to move. The man shouted with a sad face, Brother, don't get me wrong, I am, passing by. Su Tong didn't talk nonsense to the two of them, took out a wad of money and threw it on the ground. Who lives in this room, what is their name, and where have they gone? Seeing the money on the ground, the woman was stunned for a moment and shook her head, I don't know. He just rented a house here and put this puppet here. He didn't live here at all. As soon as the woman finished speaking, Su Tong's face darkened, nonsense. He said and pressed the trigger with his finger. Clang. There was no unexpected sound of the bullet breaking through the air, only the clear echo of the firing pin echoed in her ears, but it was too exciting for the woman, and she fainted as soon as she rolled her eyes. Huh? No bullets. Su Tong looked at the gun in his hand with pretense of doubt. Boy, I will fight with you. Seeing that Su Tong's pistol was out of bullets, Lao Fang picked up the bench and was about to rush forward. Boom. However, a bullet flew past Lao Fang's head and shot a hole in the bench. Plop. The wooden floor trembled slightly, and old Fang was seen kneeling on the ground. The bench in his hand had been thrown away somewhere. Jing Xiaocheng, 24 years old, a student from the Normal University, rented a house here, and left at some point, leaving this puppet behind. Oh, by the way, I really wanted to hear him say that he was going to the ghost market. Are you looking for something? I have never heard of what a ghost market is. Lao Fang told everything he knew in one breath. Ghost market. Su Tong raised his brows slightly and felt relieved. No wonder Lao Fang said he had never heard of this place. The so-called ghost market can be understood as a secret trading market for antique dealers. But if that's all, then you underestimate these antique dealers. Mr. Song occasionally mentioned the so-called ghost market. Anyone who makes antiques is regarded as a ghost in my eyes. He uses it to turn fakes into real ones and turn the humble into the noble. Furthermore, relying on power and influence, he must rely on his status to blame others. This is covered up by ghosts and evil deeds. Those who have the skills of ghosts and foxes are also. Peña Miscellaneous Notes also said that there is a ghost market on the seaside. It closes in the middle of the night and disperses after the rooster crows. People and transactions often produce foreign objects. Many antiques have unknown origins. What should I do? The antique dealer came up with an idea and set up a ghost market. People in it pretended to be ghosts and made deals with other people. But this kind of thing is just pretending. No one can tell whether the person you are trading with is a human or a ghost. There is a description of the ghost market in Mr. Song's Qingyun Yishulu. A tomb robber sneaked into the ghost market and wanted to sell a batch of antiques using his identity as a ghost. However, the price he sold was too high and the quality was not good, so no one cared about it. Just when the tomb robber was disappointed. Finally, someone came to ask for the price. When the tomb robber saw that someone had taken the bait, he hurriedly boasted about these treasures. The other party did not bargain, just packed them all, and asked if he could deliver them to his house. The tomb robber was alert and asked for the address. After making sure it was not far from here, he followed. It took him a while to find the big house, and he quickly put the antiques in and put them away. The buyer readily gave him the money, treated him to a delicious meal, and even arranged for his concubine to sleep with him until early the next morning. The tomb robber opened his eyelids and saw that he was actually sleeping in a coffin, and there was a corpse that had turned into white bones lying next to him. I almost scared the tomb robber to death. Fortunately, the tomb robber was experienced and brave enough to pry open the coffin, dig a hole and climb out. When I got out of the grave, I looked back and saw that my face turned green on the spot. Isn't the grave in the distance the same grave he just robbed? When I looked at the money in my hand, it was all money. The tomb robber fell seriously ill immediately after returning home, and soon his body began to rot, starting from the root of his life until he was rotten to the point of being in human shape. Su Tong thought for a moment, his eyes lit up, and he knew who he should go to. He ignored Lao Fang and the frightened woman and turned around and left the room. Not long after Su Tong left, Lao Fang shook the woman a few times. Seeing that she didn't wake up, he glanced at the wad of money left by Su Tong on the ground. His eyes lit up and he put the money into his trouser pocket. After waiting for a while, the woman woke up and saw that Su Tong had disappeared. She quickly asked Lao Fang if he had said anything. Lao Fang felt guilty and quickly shook his head to ensure that he didn't say anything. It was the other party who ran away when he heard the noise outside. Hey, just leave. This boy Xiaocheng has been very kind to our family. Even if we give up this old bone, we can't sell him. The woman took a deep breath and said, while old Fang's eyes drifted up to the side, thinking of the money in his arms. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty, and he repeatedly swore and shouted, "Yes, sister, you are right, I will risk everything. You can't betray this child, otherwise he will be struck to death by lightning when he goes out." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 244. Beware of the Steps. Sun Ding helped the woman out of the hotel door, looked up at the car parked on the roadside, and couldn't help but frown. Lao Lu, didn't he say that he had something to do tonight and asked him to wait early? Seeing that the car had not started yet, Sun Ding complained impatiently. He had already said that this old guy was unreliable and always missed the mark at critical moments, but his mother did not give him up. Just as Sun Ding was complaining, the car finally started and drove slowly to the mother and son. "Lao Lu, you didn't fall asleep again, did you?" "I'm not telling you, I told you earlier today that we will have dinner tonight, eh?" Before Sun Ding could finish his words, he saw that the car window was rolled down, but the person sitting in the driver's seat was not the old Lu whom Sun Ding was familiar with, but an unexpected face. "Is there any big event tonight?" When Su Tong's hoarse voice came from the car window, Sun Ding suddenly trembled and quickly turned back to look at his mother. The woman was also surprised by Su Tong's appearance, but after being stunned for a moment, her charming face immediately showed the demeanor that a high-class lady should have. "Senior is here, you just need to inform me." "There is no need for you to come to the door in person." After saying this, the woman covered her mouth and said in surprise, "Ah, Senior can actually drive." He Su Tong grinned and said, "I'm pretty good at driving. Let's get in the car." The mother and son looked at each other, and they could only open the car door and get in. Sun Ding saw the unconscious old Lu in the co-pilot, and couldn't help frowning. How did Senior know that we are here? The last time they traded in the soup house, they did not meet Su Tong. They only informed Chen Jian and Gao Zhou of the news, but did not mention their residence. After all, it is best not to let too many people know about betraying Senju and the others, let alone reveal one's address at will. Su Tong just smiled and did not explain. In fact, after he came out of Lao Fang's place, he went straight to the antique city while it was still early, because the ghost market often only started in the middle of the night. It's just that if you want to enter the ghost market, you can only find these antique dealers, but they are definitely not the kind of fakes sold at the stalls in front of you. They can only be called second-rate dealers at best. To be a real antique dealer, we still have to find the Sun Ding mother and son, but it is not difficult to find this mother and son. This mother and son are not from the mainland. They finally made a trip to El City, which is known as the capital of the gods. Naturally, they will be close to a place like the antique city, which is convenient for them to shop for things on weekdays. Just like foreign tourists always choose to stay in hotels closer to scenic spots. Nowadays, El City is full of strangers all over the world. As an antique dealer with a lot of treasures, safety is the first priority. This safety does not only refer to those who commit petty theft, but also to those strangers who possess strange skills. The only thing that can meet the two conditions is this hotel, because the police station happens to be next to the hotel. The most important thing is that they also have a very important feature, that is, in a place like El City, such a high-end car is as eye-catching as their coordinates. It would be like hell if we couldn't find them. Seeing that Su Tong didn't speak, the woman joked, "Senior is also good at calculating. It's not difficult to find us. I just don't know what Senior is looking for us on this day. Is there anything we can do for you?" Madame Binxiu is smart and she already knows it in her heart. "Do you still need me to tell you?" Su Tong said without looking back. Seeing that it was past 12 o'clock, it was the Hungry Ghost Festival, and the ghost market opened at this sensitive time. "I thought I should know the problem." Although the mother and son last time told the news about the stone statue and Kinju's plan to act in advance, they still had scruples in their hearts and did not dare to tell everything. Now it seems that Kinju's plan lies in the ghost market during this ghost festival. When the woman heard this, she held up her forehead with a wry smile. "Senior, don't dare to disobey your instructions. I just ask that you don't implicate us. After all, this is the only bloodline left in our Sun family." Su Tong nodded and stepped on the accelerator. The car made a rumble in the dark and headed straight for the southern avenue. The south of City L belongs to the new district. In reality, there are many high-rise buildings here, and the housing prices are the highest in City L, but at this time, there is only a piece of wasteland. Even the famous Sui Tang Park is a wilderness forest overgrown with rotten grass. But today it was more lively than usual. In the wilderness where no one was usually seen during the day, there were actually bonfires flickering today. From time to time, people hurried into the woods, but when they looked carefully, they could no longer find their shadows. But when Su Tong drove there, he was also surprised. He didn't expect Kinju to arrange the place here. "Senior, although you are well informed, you are still separated from others. Once you enter the ghost market, please be careful." The woman sat in the back and reminded her again and again. The ghost market is not as peaceful as people imagine, nor is it a simple antique trade. Even in the port area, several people disappear out of thin air every year in the ghost market. In their jargon, these people are all sacrifices, not to mention that this ghost market is unusual. Kinju deliberately held the ghost market on the ghost festival. No one can tell what will happen. If it weren't for Bamang's meeting and their compelling reasons, they would have left this place of right and wrong long ago. The woman had good intentions, but Su Tong didn't listen at all. He stared at the man and woman in front of him, with a faint light shining on them. Only Su Tong could see the two fluorescent lights, one green and one red. The two of them got into the woods one after another, and then they were out of sight as if they were covered by something. "Walk." Seeing this, Su Tong ignored whether the mother and son were following, pushed the door and got out of the car, and walked towards the woods. As soon as we entered the woods, the surrounding temperature suddenly dropped by 5 to 6 degrees. Although it was already autumn, the Mid-Autumn Festival was still a month away. It was still very hot, but the temperature in the woods made people feel chilled all over. Following the footprints made by the previous people on the ground, I looked through the woods and saw that the forest ahead was completely dark, and my dark vision seemed to have failed at this time. Two blue stone piers stand in the grass like invisible portals. This is Fengdu stone. Sun Ding's mother and son who followed up saw the stone pier and introduced it to Su Tong. It is said that it was polished with stone bricks from Fengdu. It can suppress the yin water in a place, and it will be unknown if it touches it. The two stone piers face each other, but a door that summons ghosts. But no one can make this thing. Only a few remains in some ruins. Sun Ding couldn't help but sigh as he spoke. Some things are indeed difficult to explain. Let's talk about this Fengdu stone. Who can pry two floor tiles from the Fengdu Ghost Palace and still come back alive? Therefore, no one knows where this thing came from, but China is so big that it can be seen not only in many famous rivers and historic sites, but also in some unknown mountains. Su Tong nodded and stepped forward. With this step, a dark wind blew up in front of his eyes. When the dark wind blew, it seemed as if the darkness was blown away. Dots of blue fire gradually became clear in the darkness. "Stand up." But before he could clearly see what those fire lights were, a huge face suddenly appeared in front of him out of thin air in the darkness. It had a green face and fangs, 2 horns on its head, and 3 pairs of eyes on its forehead. It opened its mouth angrily at Su Tong. Time passed and a ray of fluorescent light came over. The next moment Su Tong opened his eyes. What was in front of him it's hard to describe it as a different world. I saw that the place was still the same, and when I glanced around, I could still see that his current location was in Sui Tang Park. But the world has completely changed. Weird watchtowers and dilapidated palaces are stacked together, black and white lanterns hang overhead, and various floating bridges and pavilions are patchworkly connected together. It makes people feel like they are in a magical world. Rumble, rumble. At this time, the ground began to tremble, and a crack was seen tearing the earth apart. Immediately, the surrounding soil and buildings began to twist and move as the earth trembled. Su Tong walked to the crack and took a look. He saw that there were all kinds of strange palaces under the ground. If you listen carefully, you can even hear shrill wails. "Senior, don't go down casually." Sun Ding's mother and son came over and saw that Su Tong was fascinated, so they quickly reminded, "Those are not real, but they are not illusions either. We don't know exactly what they are. We just heard people say that the world below is the resentful soul of previous dynasties. The created world, once lost in it, you can never come back to." Sun Ding added on the side, "It looks like an abyss, but it's actually flat ground. But every year, some people don't know what's going on and fall in. No one has climbed out since then, so it's best to stay away from these illusions." As he spoke, Sun Ding casually threw a stone downwards. As a result, the stone just fell in the air and stopped moving, as if it was frozen there. In fact, the stone just fell to the ground. Looking at the scene in front of him, Su Tong was startled. After being stunned for a few seconds, the sentence from the first chapter of Huan Quan Lu popped out in his head, "When the truth is false, the false is also true, and there is nothing but nothing." These words hit his mind like a slap in the face, clearing his mind in an instant, and the doubts in his heart suddenly became brighter. He looked towards the bottomless abyss in front of him, and a surge of ecstasy suddenly rose in his heart. So this is it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 245. When the true is false, the false is also true, and there is something in action and nothingness. In an instant, Su Tong understood. The Huan Quan Lu given to him by his master was just the outline of the subsequent development of Bai Shan Kao. There was no cultivation method in it, but it pointed out the evolution of Bai Shan Kao to him. All the stories in the book are just like the epigraph in the first chapter. The underworld and underworld evoked by Master Bai Shan Kao are not true, but they are not false either. Rather, it is between reality and reality, just like the layers of palaces and buildings in front of you, as real as they are illusory. After understanding the secrets involved, Su Tong instantly gained a new understanding of Bai Shan Kao. But that's all, isn't it enough? Su Tong frowned again, realizing that just understanding the role of Huan Quan Lu was not enough, because he seemed to be missing a key link. If the mountain button is the key and Huan Quan Lu is the door, then, what about the keyhole? While he was thinking, Sun Ding's call came to his ears. "Senior! Senior!" Sun Ding's shout made Su Tong wake up from his epiphany. He looked back at Sun Ding's mother and son. "You don't have to worry about me. Just do whatever you need to do. I'll take a walk and take a look myself." This. The mother and son looked at each other, and they were overjoyed. The woman immediately stepped forward and said, "In this case, we won't disturb Senior's pleasure, but Senior still needs to be more careful. This ghost market itself is weird, let alone today. If Senior encounters please leave a message at the Zubeo Tower in front, and we will rush over as soon as we receive the letter." Su Tong nodded and waved his hand to signal the mother and son to leave. Not long after they left, Su Tong stepped onto a pontoon. The pontoon was suspended in the air but not fixed. The slender ropes were like the tentacles of a centipede, constantly winding towards the front to build a bridge and pave the way. People standing on it would follow without moving. The floating bridge continues deeper into the ghost market. Not to mention it feels like an elevator. When I got off the elevator, no, when I stepped off the floating bridge, there were many shops on both sides of the street. It was busier than in reality, and it felt like going to a market. However, if you look closely, most of the shops were closed. The strange thing is that these shops clearly have signboards, but I can't actually see clearly what is written on the signboards. No matter how I look at it, it is just a blur of black mist. Just as he was staring at these shops, he heard a shout not far behind him. "Brother!" He looked back and saw a figure in a cloak walking up. The cloak had a black mesh covering his face. Just listening to his voice, it felt like there was a whetstone stuck in this man's throat, and his voice was hoarse and harsh. "Let's take a look. The jade ring finger from the 8 classics is a treasure flowing out of the palace." The cloaked man raised his thumb. The ring on his skinny finger was crystal clear, and the green ripples were really beautiful under the dim light. Unfortunately, Su Tong was not interested in this thing, so he shook his head and left. "Wait a moment." Seeing that the business that finally came to his door was about to leave, the cloaked man hurriedly stopped Su Tong again, pointed to the shop behind him and said, "If brother doesn't like antiques, I have all kinds of strange treasures here. If you need anything, just ask." Su Tong glanced at the shop behind him, but when he saw the things placed on the shop, he immediately lost interest. No interest. The cloaked man was not anxious after hearing this. Instead, he took another look at Su Tong Hao and said, "Brother is not interested in these worldly things. You might as well follow me to the soul coffin shop in front to have a look. I don't think there is anything that brother needs." Soul coffin shop. This name is quite interesting. Before Su Tong could refuse, the man in cloak was already walking in front. "Your Majesty, please come this way." The man in the cloak has such a warm attitude, which of course does not mean he is hospitable. In fact, whenever you go to scenic spots or train stations, you will always encounter such enthusiastic people who will guide you and ask you questions. Are they good at reaching? No, they are after the money in your pocket. Although Su Tong has never been to any scenic spots, he has heard of this kind of thing from time to time, but he is also curious about what the so-called soul coffin shop is. He simply followed the cloaked man to take a look. The two chatted while walking. Su Tong pointed to the shops around him. "There are so many shops here, why are they all closed?" He, it's not that time yet." The cloaked man smiled, then raised his head and glanced at the paper lanterns hanging above his head, and said, "But it's almost here. The guest is here for the ghost festival. It's still a while away. When the ghosts walk at night, brothers will be here, just be careful." "Oh, does it sound dangerous?" The cloaked man did not respond, but recited a poem with his broken voice. "I also heard about the early traveler. I saw the mountains and the people in the city, no different from the world, between the two realms of humans and ghosts." As he spoke, the cloaked man suddenly raised his hand and pointed forward. "Look, that's the ghost coffin shop. The things sold there will definitely be an eye-opener for the guest." After saying that, he still said with a mysterious face, "But the things inside are very evil, so you should be careful." After speaking, the cloaked man raised his head and stretched out his palm towards Su Tong. "Sir, we are on our way, please give us some money." As he spoke, the man in the cloak rolled up a corner of his veil, seemingly casually, and saw that the face under the cloak looked like an evil ghost, with a huge eyeball occupying 1/3 of the face. Su Tong was stunned for a moment, then made a horrified look, took a step back like a frightened little rabbit, and took out a thick stack of banknotes from his pocket in panic. Looking at the thick stack of bills in his hand, the cloaked man inadvertently raised the corners of his mouth and said to himself, "Today is another business without capital." In fact, his trick is nothing new in the ghost market, but people will fall for it every time. After all, when ordinary people see such a horrified look, they must be scared to death when they think of being in a ghost market, and they hurriedly take out the money. Give away the money and leave. Seeing Su Tong holding the banknotes in his hand and flipping the numbers nervously, the corners of the cloaked man's mouth could not help but split back. "Oh, found it?" But at this time, Su Tong suddenly shouted, as if he had found something, stretched out his fingers and took out a white banknote from the thick stack of banknotes, and put it in the cloaked man's hand, with a look of false alarm. He looked so excited, wiped his sweat and said, "I was scared to death. I just remembered that I brought some change with me when I went out." The cloaked man looked at the blank piece of paper in his hand, and his voice suddenly turned gloomy. "Brother, you are not being honest. This is not the money I am talking about." "Oh, this is the money you want." Su Tong looked like he suddenly understood. He reached out and took the money back from the cloaked man. He carefully put it in his arms and raised his hand. "If you like this money, then take it." As he raised his hand, he suddenly saw the thick banknotes flying from his hand. "You're crazy." Seeing the money flying all over the sky, the man in the cloak screamed strangely, raised his head and stretched out his hand to grab it. Perhaps it was too hard, and the cloak on his head suddenly fell to the ground. When he looked again, he found a slender rope tying it on his head. Money. Grabbing a handful of money in his hand, the cloaked man didn't have time to look at it carefully, so he threw himself on the ground and started picking it up. However, the fat mask on his face interfered with his vision, so he simply pulled off the mask and threw it on the ground. As soon as the mask was thrown away and his vision became clearer, the cloaked man looked again and found that the money on the ground actually had the words TND Bank printed on it. Underworld coin. Seeing this, the corner of the cloaked man's mouth twitched a few times, and he felt evil fire in his heart. "Damn, you and I are pretending to be ghosts. I have been to the ghost market so many times, and it's not like I haven't seen ghosts before." Thinking of this, the cloaked man threw away the coins in his hand. When he turned around, he saw Su Tong had picked up the mask he had thrown away and was playing with it in his hand. Seeing his leisurely look, the cloaked man was so angry that his eyelids were twitching. When he was about to get angry, he suddenly became stunned and looked at Su Tong blankly. Under the shadow, Su Tong was holding the mask in one hand, and slowly raised the other hand, tearing at his face bit by bit. Seeing the skin being roughly torn off one after another, the cloaked man's mind went blank. When the face was completely torn open, a group of yellow tumors squirmed on the face. It wasn't until the other person put the one-eyed mask back on his face that he turned back and asked him, "Do you think it fits just right?" Hiss. The cloaked man has come to the ghost market more than once to sell stolen goods. Even if he encounters some dirty things, as long as he obeys the rules, these dirty things can't do anything to him. What's more, most of the ghosts are not only not scary, but even stupid, and are often deceived. But he had never seen such a weird scene, and the cloaked man's head suddenly felt numb. The most hateful thing was that he found that his legs were trembling a little. Huh? It doesn't seem very suitable. Su Tong touched his face, turned around slowly, and the huge eyeball on the mask slowly moved, looking towards the cloaked man, and slowly stretched out his palm. "Your face seems to fit well." Hearing this, the man in the cloak turned pale, opened his mouth half open, and trembled for a long time before finally letting out a hoarse scream, "Ghost!" As he spoke, he started to run on the ground. Perhaps because of his haste, he fell down several times. Finally, his foot slipped and his head hit the door of a shop, causing him to faint. Hey! It's not fun. Looking at the cloaked man knocked unconscious, Su Tong curled his lips, thinking that people in the ghost market shouldn't be afraid of ghosts, but he fainted this time. He slowly stretched out his hand and wiped it on his face. The resentful spirit that was originally attached to his face immediately returned to his hand and turned into a meatball, which Su Tong threw back into the prop book. Ghosts scare people to death, and people scare people to death. Little brother, you've gone too far, a light joking voice came. Su Tong looked back and saw a young man in black leaning against the door of the shop with a mouthful of food in his mouth. Holding a toothpick, she looked at him with her arms folded. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 246. The young man in black has long black hair and standard facial features, which makes people think he is a girl at first glance. There was a toothpick in his mouth, and he looked decadent and lazy, giving people a very bad feeling all over his body. When Su Tong heard this, he couldn't help but slowly raised his head and looked above his head for a long time. It wasn't until Ji Fei couldn't help but glance upwards that he frowned and said, "What are you looking at?" Su Tong said without looking back, "It depends on the weather." Weather? Ji Fei chewed a toothpick disapprovingly. He had never heard of the weather being able to be seen in a ghost market. But then Su Tong slowly lowered his head, patted his chest, and said with a lingering fear, "It's okay, it's fine, otherwise I would be so close to you, I would be afraid of thunder and hurt me." "What do you mean?" Ji's expression suddenly became unnatural when he heard this rumor. "Why are you cursing someone in a roundabout way?" Su Tong grinned, ignoring Ji Fei's angry eyes, and walked into the door of the ghost coffin shop. Although the store may not look big, the space inside is much larger than he thought. Coffins were neatly placed around them. What was surprising was that the lids of each coffin were made of crystal. You can see all kinds of people lying inside. No. Not only people, he even saw a snow-white fox. The fox had a slender body and hair as pure as snow, and this fox actually had 3 tails. When he looked again, he saw a note written on the side of the coffin. "Lend me 3 years of longevity, and I will promise you 3 lives of wealth." I don't know if it was an illusion, but the eyes of the fox in the coffin suddenly flashed a flash of green light, and it seemed that he opened his eyes in an instant. "How about it?" "I haven't seen it or heard of it, country bumpkin." Before he could take a closer look, Ji Fei had already walked up to Su Tong and put his arm casually on the coffin, pointing at the coffin. Here are all rare treasures, all of which are unpolluted souls in the netherworld. Thousands of gold hard to buy, priceless and marketless." Su Tong frowned for a moment, but soon relaxed, grinned at Ji Fei, and replied with only 2 words, "Ha ha." Then he turned around and looked at the other coffin. Lying quietly in this coffin is a woman dressed in white. The woman has curved eyebrows and long eyelashes trembling slightly. Her fair and flawless skin shows a faint red pink. Lying in the coffin, she looks lifelike, as if she is just sleeping. It's the same thing. There is a line of small words written on the outside of the coffin: "I wish to have the person of my heart, and we will never be separated until we grow old." Su Tong narrowed his eyes and slowly moved his face closer to the coffin, as if he was fascinated by something. "Ha! Honest." Ji Fei stood behind Su Tong, and when he saw Brother Zhu's appearance, he couldn't help but despise him. But at the same time, he couldn't help but look forward to it, and couldn't help but induce him. "Brother, if you want a wife or not, this is a ready-made one. As long as you sign your name on the side, she will be your wife from now on. She will never leave you, work hard and never complain. And such stunning beauties are rare." However, as soon as Ji Fei finished speaking, Su Tong slowly took out a tissue, wiped it on the lid of the crystal coffin, turned around and threw the tissue to the young man, frowned and said with disgust, "Your family doesn't do this. Is it hygienic? There is such a big fly droppings on it." Ji Fei was stunned for a moment, then picked up the tissue and took a look, and immediately said angrily, "Shit, this is obviously just a small flying insect. That's not hygienic either. How is it possible? This is just a coincidence. Hee hee. What are you hee hee? Unhygienic." About 10 minutes later, Ji Fei finally covered his forehead helplessly and waved his hand, you can do whatever you want. Obviously he no longer wanted to tangle with the guy in front of him on this issue. Seeing him looking like he had defeated the rooster, Su Tong seemed a little unhappy, but soon he noticed a special coffin. This coffin is different from other coffins. It does not have a crystal lid. The dark coffin lid has the word evil written in cinnabar. What's even more strange is that as soon as he gets close to the coffin, the resentful spirit in the prop book immediately starts to stir. He seemed to be very interested in the contents of the coffin. That thing is not for sale, Gfeo said with a dark face. The guy inside is a major Japs devil. Su Tong turned his head curiously. Then why can't you sell it? Selling to the Japanese is no better than selling. As he said this, his eyes glanced at Gfeo, and finally stared at Gfeo's butt. You are looking for death. Gfeo's face turned cold and his tone immediately became unkind. Seeing Gfeo's increasingly unkind expression, Su Tong couldn't help but widen his eyes, and after considering it for a moment, his eyes suddenly became moist, and he choked and said, "No, I just think that your unruly appearance is very similar to a friend of mine. Well, you may not know how good our relationship is. I haven't seen him for a long time. When I see you, things miss people, I miss him." Seeing his sincere expression, Gfeo couldn't help but calm down a little, but then he thought, isn't that right? What does it mean to miss someone when you see something? Is this guy scolding me? Just when Gfeo was about to argue with Su Tong, the long bell rang. Gfeo suddenly thought of something, looked up at the time on the clock, shouted "Oh no, no more trouble with Su Tong," turned around and rushed out the door. I picked up the door panel and hurriedly closed the store door. Maybe I was too anxious, so the last two door panels were inserted in the wrong order, leaving a gap as wide as my thumb exposed. Gfeo wanted to pull it out and plug it in again, but then a scream suddenly came from outside the door. Bang bang bang. The sound of chopping meat came from the street, which made Gfeo's heart tighten. He raised his head and looked sideways, and saw a shop not far from him. He didn't know when it had opened. A bald man with a stubble on his face was holding a meat cleaver in his hand, cutting into pieces one by one. With each cut, flesh and bones flew everywhere and blood sprayed everywhere. When he looked again, he saw a bloody human head placed on the bald display board. It was none other than the guy who was so frightened by Su Tong that he bumped into the door and fainted. As if aware of Gfeo's gaze, the bald head raised his head and looked over. When he saw Gfeo, the bald head was stunned for a moment, and then his whole face twisted. He pulled out the machete on the display board and walked towards the side. Seeing the butcher with a fierce look on his face coming towards him, Gfeo's heart suddenly skipped a beat and he didn't know how he had offended this guy. Just as I was wondering, I looked back and found that there was a piece of paper hanging above my head. On it was a crooked drawing of a little man shouting. There were 4 words below. "Come and chop me." Hiss. Seeing this piece of paper, the veins on Gfeo's forehead bulged, and his blood pressure almost reached Tianling Gai. He grabbed the paper and threw it on the ground. He didn't even bother to straighten the wrong door panel, and hurriedly put the last one in place. The door panel is plugged in. As soon as the door panel was plugged in, there was a loud banging sound on the door, and a big knife struck the door panel, which split the 2-finger-thick door panel into pieces. Boom, boom, open the door. Little bastard, you have the guts to provoke, why don't you have the guts to open the door? Open the door for me, and see if I don't chop you into dumpling fillings. Open the door. There was a deafening slamming sound on the door, and the punches came down one after another, as if they were not hitting the door, but hitting Gfeo's heart. Looking at the instigator again, I found that this guy was actually leaning against the table, with his hands clasped in his arms and a paint pen in the corner of his mouth. He imitated Gfeo's previous decadent look and tone and said, "You don't do any business that comes to me. Hey, brother, you can't make a fortune like this. Ji Feo stared at Su Tong blankly, and suddenly felt that he was so unlucky. Why did he provoke this madman? Aren't you looking for death? I know, but I want to buy this coffin. Su Tong pointed to the coffin with the word fierce written on it. Ji Feo was speechless. Then why did you provoke him? As soon as he finished speaking, the entire door panel began to shake violently, and the banging on the door became more and more urgent. This made Ji Feo wonder if the bald head outside continued to shake, and his shop would collapse. Su Tong said with a smile, if he comes in and kills you, I can justifiably take away the coffin. This is called $0 shopping. It's the latest consumption method in the United States. I've never seen it or heard of it, you country bumpkin. Sorry, I'm stuck and the update is a little late. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 247. The muscles on Ji Feo's face kept trembling. He felt that he had never seen such a shameless person who could talk about robbery in such a high-sounding way. Still buying it for 0 yuan? I believe you are evil. Ji Fei wanted to curse, but the violent slamming of the door behind him made him tremble with fear. He was afraid that the guy outside would smash the door open, and even more afraid that making too much noise would provoke those terrible things. Turning his eyes, he saw Su Tong holding his arms, looking like he was just watching the fun and not taking it too seriously. The corners of Ji Feo's mouth twitched a few times. The coffin belongs to you, help me get rid of that guy outside. After it's done, I'll tell you how to open the coffin, otherwise you won't be able to open it even if you take the coffin away. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud click, and as the bald butcher stepped down hard, the wooden boards that had been inserted in the wrong order suddenly fell to the ground. A burst of dust flew up, and the entire wooden door panel was dented and broken, leaving a big hole. My door panel, Ji Feo backed away quickly, and at the same time he wailed in his heart. This door panel seemed inconspicuous, but it was made of high-quality gloomy wood. However, after a brief moment of heartache, Ji Feo's heart skipped a beat and he looked up. When he saw the butcher slowly raising the bright kitchen knife towards him with a grin on his face, Ji Feo was instantly frightened and turned around to grab it. Su Tong's arm. Brother. You are my brother. I was wrong. I don't dare to tease you anymore. Take the coffin and I will give you another good thing. A little thin, but just right for making steamed buns. The butcher looked at the two of them and walked up to them with a knife. As for Su Tong on the side, he didn't even notice. Anyway, killing one or two would be a kill. He had just opened the door and it was out of stock. Seeing the butcher getting closer and closer, Ji Feo's face turned pale. He could only close his eyes and wait for death. He already thought that when his master came back and saw his head on the butcher's table, he didn't know what would happen. Will not avenge myself. Hello. Seeing Ji Feo's timid appearance, Su Tong finally asked, why do you want to open such a shop in a ghost market if you are so timid? The relaxed tone seemed to be a casual question, as if the butcher who had raised the big knife in front of him was not paying attention at all. Ji Feo raised his head and was about to answer, but when he saw the kitchen knife that had been slashed towards Su Tong's head, he screamed, be careful. Su Tong raised his brows slightly. Without even looking, he thrust his body into the butcher's arms. While avoiding the blade, he exerted force on his feet and raised his knee in the air to press the butcher's chest. The astonishing power made the butcher scream. He probably didn't expect such a thin guy to be so powerful. Just when he was about to fight back, a slender arm stretched out like lightning, and hit the butcher's throat with a knife. The butcher's head tilted, and a third of his neck was dented. An injury like this would be enough for a normal person to be sent to the emergency room. If you are lucky and meet a doctor with good skills, you may still survive. If you are not lucky, you can only treat it as practicing skills for doctors. However, the butcher's eyes shook a few times, and then his pupils tightened. Instead of falling, he raised the kitchen knife in his hand and chopped it down. "Be careful, he is not a human," Ji Fei also reminded from behind. Su Tong curled his lips, and resentment appeared in his hand out of thin air. It transformed into a thin glove and wrapped around his hand. He grabbed the blade and twisted his wrist. The butcher had no time to hold the blade tightly before the knife was snatched away. Then he jumped up in the air and slapped the big knife on the butcher's head horizontally with a pop sound. The butcher's round head turned into an oval on the spot, and his body swayed and fell heavily to the ground. Accompanied by a strange cry, the butcher struggled to get up. Seeing this, Su Tong shook his head, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "If I were you, I would crawl obediently, because I am professional in fighting ghosts." As he spoke, the devil bell appeared in his hand, and he grabbed the bald head with his big hand. "Guard the soul." A crack opened in the palm of his hand, and a terrible suction force came out. This time the butcher was really scared and struggled to break away from the suction force. He only struggled twice, and finally with a scream, Su Tong grabbed him. "In the palm of your hand, it becomes a ball." "Is this solved?" Ji Fei hid behind the counter and looked at the situation for less than a minute. The scary butcher was actually easily killed by this guy, and he couldn't help but be stunned. But he quickly remembered something and hurriedly ran out and plugged the door panel in again, for fear of attracting any dirt again. However, 2 of the door panels were broken by the butcher's kick, so that even after inserting them in order, there was already a huge gap exposed in one place. Ji Fei poked his head out and took a look, and suddenly trembled at the corner of his mouth. He saw that the outside had changed. The originally deserted streets were now filled with people. This was the first time he had seen so many people in the ghost market for so many years. Wandering ghosts gather in the ghost market. Just as I was looking at it, I suddenly heard a whisper in my ear, "What are you looking at? Let me take a look." Ji Fei's expression changed. He was afraid that this ancestor would cause trouble again, so he hurriedly stretched out his hand to stop him, but his thin body did not have the strength of Su Tong. Su Tong raised his hand like a kitten or puppy and threw Ji Fei aside. He stuck his head out and took a look. "Hey, it's quite lively. Why don't you open the door for business when it's so lively? Why do you close the door instead? In that case, why do you do business in a place like the ghost market?" Ji Fei pulled his arm, trying to pull him back, but he couldn't pull him back after several pulls. He could only say with a sad face, "That's true, but the ghost market is not all about getting rich as you think. Come on, our industry cannot see the light, so we can only hide in the ghost market. Normally, it is fine, both humans and ghosts have rules, but today, during the Ghost Festival, the gates of ghosts are wide open, and hundreds of ghosts are walking at night, which is very dangerous. A place like the ghost market is a place outside the law. There are all kinds of monsters, ghosts, and snakes. It can be described as a mixed bag. There are some shady industries among them, and you have to stay here whether you like it or not. Just like Ji Weiyu, their family is in the soul coffin business. People are buried in coffins, but ghosts are buried in soul coffins. Those desperate monsters and elves buy a coffin from them, bury themselves in it, and wait for the destined person to come and take the coffin away. This is the business of the soul coffin shop, which is shady. Not only is it shady, but it also often deals with ghosts. Moreover, they have been doing this business for 10 generations. He is already the 9th generation to come to his master, and he himself has not yet left the master, he just needs to guard the shop. Originally, according to the plan, his master should have returned early, but I don't know what happened. He never came back since the last time he went out, and there has been no news. Without his master in charge, Ji Fei could only guard the shop by himself, not daring to deal with those ghosts easily. What's more, today's situation was special. Hundreds of ghosts were walking at night, and the ghost market didn't know what kind of commotion it would cause. He had already made up his mind to close down. Yes, it's just that he was unlucky to encounter the disaster of Sutong. Thinking of this, Ji Weio suddenly felt that the man in the cloak deserved to die. Who allowed him to lead this disaster to his home? What is that? While Ji Weio was still thinking, Sutong suddenly pointed at the huge lantern above his head. He hadn't noticed that the lantern hadn't been lit before. That, it seems. Ji Weio stuck his head out and looked for a long time, only to see a huge lantern hanging in the air. The color of the lantern was also very strange, one black and one white, but there was still dark green dancing inside. Fluorescence. Many blurry shadows could be seen, all converging in the direction of the lantern, as if something was attracting him. Ji Weio looked at it for a long time, and finally explained awkwardly, "I don't know, it didn't exist before. Go check it out." Sutong was about to leave as he spoke. Ji Weio's expression changed and he quickly pulled him back and said, "No, what should I do if you leave? There is such a big hole in this door. What if something comes in, can't stop it?" Sutong pointed at the coffins in the shop and joked, "Can't stop it? You are both a wife and a fox here? The price is so fair, don't you have everything if you open two by yourself?" This time Ji Weio looked even more embarrassed, and said in a squeaky voice, this is against the rules." "What's against the rules? What should I do if I can't save my life?" "I don't care, I'm going to take a look," Sutong said and was about to leave. Ji Weio saw this and quickly grabbed Sutong. No, 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 I'll be honest with you, you can't meet the conditions they set." It turns out that the conditions written on the outside of the coffin may seem simple, but behind them are bloody costs. "I just borrowed Yang Shao from the vixen and said it was 3 years of Yang Shao, but there was a word play in it. Because the vixen's soul is incomplete, 1 day consumes 3 years of her lifespan. If you lend her enough life to live for 3 years, you can calculate on your own fingers. Even a god may not be able to give you enough. Often some people who are greedy for wealth will be sucked dry by this vixen on the spot after signing an agreement. So if you say that you are willing to have the same person, the one who will never be separated for a long time is also a trap, right?" Sutong glanced at the woman in the coffin behind him and asked curiously. "Well?" Ji Weio nodded awkwardly, but did not say what the specific situation was. In short, not everyone could take away the coffins in this store. They don't mean to harm others, but the rules are like this. When a truly destined person comes, a good relationship will be achieved. If someone who is not destined to insist on it, the final result will naturally be harming others and themselves. So, can you please not leave? I will give you a reward. Oh, by the way, and this." Ji Weio seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly took out something from under the counter and handed it to Sutong. The thing turned out to be a palm-sized crystal coffin. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shuigan Xiao. Chapter 248. What is this, a tourist souvenir? Sutong took the crystal coffin in his hand and played with it. It was very small and delicate, and looked almost like a small ornament. Don't underestimate this thing. This is a soul crystal. It's very rare. In order to make this small soul coffin, I secretly cut a piece of soul crystal from a piece of soul crystal. My master almost beat me to death, Ji Weio said. That incident made me feel uncomfortable instantly. He didn't even dare to let his master see this thing, for fear that his master would get angry after seeing it and might beat him up again. Without waiting for Ji Weio to introduce the wonderful use of this thing, Sutong threw the thing into the prop book, and saw that the prop book immediately gave an entry about this thing. Soul coffin, small. The wandering soul has no place to rely on, and will lose its true spirit for a long time. The wind blows like duckweeds, the light shines like fire, and the thunder blows away the ashes. It is hidden in the coffin to gather yin qi to nourish the true spirit for thousands of years. Active Skill 1, Soul Burial. Putting the soul in it can protect the soul from death and not be affected by the outside world. Active Skill 2, Stay Overnight. By spending 2 script points, the soul in the coffin can stay in the host's body for 30 minutes. Cooling time, 24 hours. The host can choose others or himself, but if others refuse, the soul will be beaten back to the soul coffin. Su Tong carefully examined the entry of the soul coffin. This thing has some uses, but he has not thought about how to use it. However, as Ji Fei said, this thing is indeed good and a treasure. Okay, I'll take the things. I'll leave the coffin with you first and pick it up when I come back. Ah. You still want to leave? Seeing that Su Tong still wanted to leave after collecting his things, Ji Fei's face tightened, and he glanced sideways at the vast shadow outside, but, it's very dangerous outside. I won't come here because I'm afraid of danger. I'm leaving. After saying this, Su Tong pushed open the door and walked out. Not far away, he heard Ji Fei's shout from behind, "Wait a minute." Turning around, he saw Ji Fei following him, holding a big package around his waist. "Wait for me." Ji Fei ran to him, "I'll go with you." "What about your store?" Su Tong looked at him doubtfully. "The door is broken, what am I doing here alone? Anyway, the soul coffin is for those who are destined to get it. Greedy ghosts who are not destined will only seek their own death. It will be safer for me to follow you." Ji Fei was also free and easy. There were a lot of valuable things in the shop, but not everyone could take them away. What could be taken away was all in the small bag in his arms. Su Tong was amused by Ji Fei. He laughed a few times and his expression gradually became serious. "You are quite good at planning, but my ability is limited. If I can protect you, I will protect you. If I can't, I understand. We can't guarantee that everyone will run away separately. Besides, I'm quite familiar with the ghost market. You look like you've been to the ghost market for the first time. I'm not exaggerating. If you just run around like this, you might end up somewhere." Ji Fei raised her head with an arrogant expression, which made Su Tong's smile brighter. "I just like how proud you are." After the two of them talked, Ji Fei took Su Tong forward. On the way, he saw that almost all the shops in the ghost market were open, but the items sold were all kinds of strange. A noodle shop on the street is doing good business. There are guests sitting at every table. A large bowl of noodles is topped with various braises, a spoonful of oil and chili peppers, and a few green cabbage leaves are boiled on top. Just looking at it makes people appetite. Not to mention the wandering ghosts passing by. Even looking at it made me feel my appetite increased, but when I looked at the process below, I lost my appetite in an instant. I saw the boss spreading a piece of white paper on it, cutting it into strips with a knife, and throwing it into a pot aside with a flick of his hand. When I looked at the pot again, I saw cold water and no fire underneath. But after the boss stirred it a few times with chopsticks, it turned into steaming noodles. He looked at a shop in front of him that was actually selling tombstones. A skinny old man was sitting in front of the shop, shouting to the people passing by, "There are no famous people in life, and nameless ghosts after death. People will judge the merits of the past life, and who is the real or fake one on the tombstone. As everyone knows, brothers who are passing by may as well bring a tombstone for themselves. If it is discovered by archaeologists that day, it may be prosperous." After hearing this, Su Tong realized that the tombstone of feelings was made by the old man himself, which is a bit like the meaning of false certificates in reality. Look here, it's a fine shroud. 10,000 taels of gold will be snatched up by thousands of people in this world, but 10,000 taels of gold in the underworld. Brothers and sisters who need it, come and take a look. There was an endless stream of hawking sounds on the street, and Ji-Fei hid beside Su Tong timidly, watching the passers-by around him with vigilant eyes. There are all kinds of fancy clothes, but everyone seems to have a haze surrounding them. It's exactly what my master said. These wandering souls are all released from the underworld. They have the mark of the underworld on their bodies. They will be recalled when the time comes, Ji-Fei thought to himself. At this time, Su Tong, who was walking in front, suddenly stopped. Ji-Fei couldn't dodge and almost bumped into him. He quickly stuck his head out and followed Su Tong's gaze. When he saw Su Tong looking at a longevity food store, he hurriedly pulled Su Tong a few times. 9 out of 10 of these shops are ghosts, and the things they sell may not be real. Some of the things seem to be rare treasures, but when you leave the gate of the ghost market, you will find that they are all genuine. Tattered. In the ghost market, things are real and fake are real. This is true for people, ghosts, and antiques. What matters is one's eyesight. If you don't have any real ability and want to make money here, then just wait for it to be slapped. Ji-Fei told Su Tong a few things he knew in detail, and they were all stories about unlucky people who suffered big losses in the ghost market. Actually, it's okay for ghosts to come to the ghost market. After all, those guys with problems won't come to a place like this. I don't know if it was to embolden him, but Ji-Fei talked a lot along the way. You know, I saw a fool before, just when Ji-Fei wanted to share with Su Tong what he had seen and heard. Su Tong suddenly covered this guy's mouth and pulled him aside. Stop talking and follow me. As he said this, he pulled Ji-Fei forward without caring. The reason why he was so anxious was because he happened to see an acquaintance. No, he should be considered an enemy. 4 old men. These 4 were the same old men who besieged me at the train station last time. I couldn't remember their names, but I would never forget their faces. I remember that at that time they were shouting that they were going to cut me into pieces and extract the soul to refine the oil. It was just a blink of an eye, but Su Tong recognized the 4 people at a glance, pulling Ji-Fei to follow them slowly and leisurely. From a distance, he could hear the 4 people chatting as they walked. Senju, it's true that such a big thing is handed over to a young boy. The old man who spoke had a birthmark on his face, and his voice was loud and unconcealed. He was obviously very dissatisfied with the young boy he spoke of. However, the old man with the straw hat on the side had another opinion. Brother Yang, that's not what you said. Hun Zhonglong is Qian Shao's confidant, not to mention that this time Qian Shao has found several new Taoist friends who are quite powerful. It's not bad, I think it will be fine. Humph, it's the new ones, I don't believe them. Whenever these skinless things pop up in the world and dare to point fingers at us, there is something wrong with the origins of these people. Stop talking nonsense. He has big fists. Didn't you see that guy with 9 fingers? He was full of evil energy. With one palm, the Thunder Hand Luo Wenbo suffered a big loss and almost vomited blood, but he couldn't even move without moving. No. When another old man talked about this, he couldn't help sighing, saying that the waves behind the Yangtze River push the waves ahead, and the Zhaojian before had already made huge waves in their hearts. Now, a character more ruthless than Zhaojian has appeared, and his strength is also extraordinary. Old guys like them instantly feel like they were shot to death on the shore. Stop talking nonsense and leave quickly. It's already good for people like us old guys to share a sip of soup. As a human being, you must be content. The old man who had been silent until now saw that they were complaining and immediately spoke to urge them. The other 3 old people nodded when they heard this. That's right. After all, we are responsible for the cause and effect. We don't have to do anything. It's not bad to take a sip of soup. There are so many ghosts in the ghost market this time. Even a sip of soup can prolong our lives, all right. When the four of them said this, they burst into laughter. Su Tong hid in the back corner and listened carefully. He couldn't help but frown when he heard the words. He couldn't help thinking about the words of these four old guys. It seemed that the players who had arrived had joined the Kinju camp. And the person with the 9 fingers they mentioned might be the Jing Shaocheng they were originally looking for. Seeing the size on the faces of these four old men, it seemed that this Jing Shaocheng was really a certified player. The four old men were also strange, walking around the enclosure towards the northeast corner. That's not right. If you go further, you will reach the exit of the ghost market, Ji Fei couldn't help but said doubtfully as he looked at the path that was getting more and more deviated. Exit. Su Tong was also very surprised. Since Kinju and the others were going to make a big noise, why did these people stay at the exit? Is it to prevent someone from escaping? With doubts, the two of them followed quietly, only to see an old man striding toward the exit of the ghost market. Four old brothers, are you leaving? Seeing the four people approaching, an old man on crutches who was guarding the exit came forward and asked, according to the rules of the ghost market, you need to pay a ticket when leaving the ghost market. Facing the gatekeeper's inquiry, the four of them looked at each other, and the old man with the birthmark on his face stepped forward and said with a smile, yes, we have gained a lot this time, and you can see that they are all good things. As he spoke, he took off a bag from his waist and opened it to let the gatekeeper see. Ha ha ha, congratulations to you, brother, my little brother who is so proud of you has his eyes opened today. The gatekeeper lowered his head and stretched his neck in front of the bag with a smile, and was about to see what treasure was inside. Suddenly, a cold light suddenly flashed from the bag, and a scimitar came out of the bag. The silver light shone and the coldness was overwhelming. The next moment the gatekeeper's head fell into the bag. The old man pocketed the bag, looked at the bloody head inside and sneered, look, let me just say this is a treasure. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 249. Oh. The people on the sidelines looked at the gatekeeper's headless body falling to the ground, and their expressions suddenly changed with fear. A few cleverly noticed something was wrong, and their first reaction was not to shout, but to run towards the door. We can't go, this road is blocked. Since the four old men were taking action, there was no chance of anyone escaping. One old man nodded the crutch in his hand, and wisps of black mist poured out from under the crutch. Several people were about to run to the door, but suddenly their feet sank, and they found that they could no longer run, and their feet seemed to be frozen in place. When he lowered his head and looked down, he saw that the soles of his feet were entangled with a black mist. Just when he was horrified at what it was, he suddenly heard someone calling his name. He subconsciously turned around to look, but as soon as he turned around, his eyes suddenly turned dark. The person fell to the ground without breathing. Poisons, curses, spells, and spells, the four old men each showed their magical powers and stood in front of the door, like plague gods, killing people or ghosts on sight. Hiss. Are these four old guys crazy? Ji Fei hid in the corner and watched the four old men killing each other, killing both humans and ghosts. She was so frightened that her face turned pale. Although the ghost market is not peaceful, every place has its own rules. Killing an individual for personal grudges is not a big deal, but killing people all the way through the door is completely different. Woo! As soon as the four people took action, a deep horn sound echoed in the huge ghost market, and Ji Fei felt that the surrounding light suddenly brightened. Looking up, Ji Fei was immediately dumbfounded. I saw the huge lantern above my head rising slowly, and the black and white stripes on the lantern flashed, revealing the appearance of a well head. What was even weirder was that he found that the black mist surrounding the ghosts disappeared when illuminated by the light. This discovery immediately frightened Ji Fei. That black mist is the mark of the underworld on the ghosts. It is said that there is a bell at the entrance of the underworld. When the bell rings, these ghosts with the mark on their bodies, whether willingly or not, will be taken back to the underworld and will not be allowed to stay in the earth for a while. And this black mist is also a kind of passport. There is a door god posted on the door of every house. The door god protects all evil spirits and forces them to retreat. If the ghost wants to go home, the door god sees the black mist on it and naturally lets it in. But if this black mist disappears, let alone go home, it will be a lonely ghost, and no one will care about it even if it is destroyed. In the huge ghost market right now, there are at least tens of thousands of ghosts who have returned from the underworld. The black mist on so many ghosts has disappeared. What is going to happen? Although Gfeu had not left the profession, he was surrounded by his master and had seen a lot in the ghost market. His heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly felt like a disaster was imminent. He was very panicked now, his heart was beating loudly, as if jumping into his throat, his head was buzzing every time, and he was not sure whether he was right or wrong to come out this time. Thinking of this, he subconsciously looked at the guy next to him. When he saw that there was nothing unusual about that thin face, Gfeu felt at ease for a moment. Wait. At this time, Su Tong suddenly stood up and was about to walk out. Gfeu was startled and hurried to pull him away, but he was a step too late. Su Tongren had already walked out of the corner. Gfeu was so anxious that he danced behind him. Hey, don't go forward. What are you doing? You don't want to die. However, Su Tong turned a deaf ear to this, his figure clung to the wall as silently as a ghost, and moved toward the four people in front of the door. It's so happy, so happy. The four old men in front of the door were killing with all their heart, and they had never felt happier. They had worked hard all their lives, and there were not many opportunities to actually take action. As time went by, and now, there was no possibility for them to do it easily. If they attract the attention of the authorities, their 10 lives will not be enough. After all, compared to magic, guns and bullets are the real weapons in the world. What's more, if we really transfer those veterans who have come off the battlefield, whether their magic can be effective is another matter. Now they can let go and express all they have learned throughout their lives, and it feels great. It's like you've worked hard to level up, stayed up all night to clear dungeons, and after maxing out your levels and equipment, you finally come to the novice village, with each skill and one kid, and whoever uses it will know the joy. Stop. The four of them were getting ready to kill when they suddenly saw a figure rushing towards them. Upon closer inspection, the four of them immediately became happy. They saw a thin guy, no more than 12 or 13 years old. If they looked closely, they found that this kid had a hole in his chest. He was obviously just a ghost. It's ridiculous that a little ghost dared to rush towards them instead of running away when they saw them. You're seeking your own death. It doesn't matter, it seems like you didn't have the chance to be reincarnated. The old man with the birthmark on his face was called Yang Wantu. When he saw this, he sneered and slowly raised the bag in his hand. He saw that there were already 5 or 6 human heads in the bag. There are both men and women, there are people and ghosts, and what's even weirder is that these heads seem to be conscious, and they are wailing with their mouths wide open. Yang Wantu pointed the bag at the child, threw it at him, and shouted excitedly, "One more." The little boy looked at the cloth bag under the hood, and an arm holding a sharp knife poked out. His face changed, but he did not retreat. He grabbed his hands in the air, and unexpectedly pulled out a red tasseled spear, which he pointed at the cloth bag. Prick inside. A murderous aura suddenly flashed from the spear, and it actually poked a hole in the bag. It was unexpected that such a young child could have such a strong murderous aura. The bag was pierced immediately, and there was a scream from inside that was neither a man nor a woman. There was a clang, and the gleaming silver blade came out of the bag. Fell out. The child flicked the spear and threw the bag to the ground, with red tassels floating in the air. The child glared at the four old men. Although he was young, his chest was straight. He pointed at the old man and said, "You traitors, you are not even worthy of being a human being if you kill your own compatriots." Yang Wantu didn't take this kid seriously at all, but it was obvious that a hole had been poked out of his treasure. His facial features were all twisted together, and he was shocked and angry. He ignored the child's words and just beat his chest and screamed, "Ah, my Kinkan man's treasure bag. You can't tell, this is the soul of Hai Lengzi." Another old man named Chai Le flashed a cold light in his eyes. He stepped forward to stop Yang Wantu and said, "This is a good thing. It has the soul of a hero with meritorious deeds. Normally, the underworld will not let them return to the sun easily, but we actually encountered it today, ha ha ha, what luck, let me catch it and refine another magic weapon." "Humph, I'm giving you an advantage, you old guy. It's just that my Kinkan man's treasure bag was ruined by this kid. You have to give me some vent." Yang Wantu looked at the torn bag on the ground. After the bag was punctured, a large amount of black blood flowed out, which made Yang Wantu feel pain. It took him 10 years to make this bag. It was so destroyed. "Ha ha ha ha, brother Yang, this is also bad luck. When your Kinkunran treasure bag met this kid, it was like ice thrown into the stove. Forget it, the old ones won't go away and the new ones won't come, watch me catch this kid and let you vent your anger." Chai Le laughed and walked forward. He glanced sideways at the kid with a greedy look in his eyes. He moved the crutch in his hand to the sole of his foot, and suddenly black mist surged towards the kid. "Kill!" Seeing the black mist approaching, the child not only did not retreat, but his young face showed no fear, and his black and white eyes flashed with murderous intent, as if there was a ball of fire beating, giving people an unstoppable feeling in an instant. Brave, he raised his spear and rushed towards the black mist. It's just that since Chai Le took action, how could he be unintentional? He raised the corner of his mouth and squeezed the seal with his fingers, and the black mist turned into thick smoke and swallowed up the thin figure. The black smoke was billowing, giving people a feeling like glue, which was solidifying rapidly. No matter how hard he tried to rush inside, he could not break out. Instead, his body became heavier and heavier, as if he was being sealed inside. He, my black water mine cannot be broken by just you and your courage. Just stay inside and wait until today's business is over. I will train you well." After Chai Le finished speaking, he and the other three burst into laughter. The joy of doing evil is really addictive and addictive. While the four of them were laughing innocently, they suddenly noticed a murderous aura that gripped people's minds. Yang Wantu looked up in horror. As he looked, he saw a sharp figure in the darkness in the distance, with a ferocious smile on his thin face. The cold eyes are like a cheetah that has successfully sneaked into the hunting range. The blue fire is reflected in the pupils. The hands are spread out. Two evil flames of completely different natures are burning, like a ball of strange fire meteors in the darkness. Rush over to them quickly. It's him. The moment he saw Su Tong, Yang Wantu was horrified. He screamed and pointed at Su Tong, his trembling mouth unable to finish his words. After finally shouting out the words, Su Tong's people were already close at hand. With the blessing of the skill leopard attack, he was so fast that he stepped on a pool of blood. The blood splashed in all directions and boiled in the air. With the force of the step, his whole body flew up like a hunting falcon, black and blue flames were stored in his fists, and he punched the nearest Chai Le. Facing the terrifying fire that seemed like a scourge, Chai Le screamed and raised the crutch in his hand across his chest. Unexpectedly, Su Tong suddenly withdrew his fists, stepped on the crutches, and jumped over Chai Le again. He was hanging upside down in the air, and reached out to grab Chai Le's white head. Immediately, demonic flames and corrosive fires erupted in the palm of his hand at the same time. Chai Li didn't even have time to scream. His head was instantly swallowed up by the flames, and the flesh on his face shrank rapidly. By the time Su Tong fell to the ground, his head was only the skeleton remains.